Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we are once again getting back into our ongoing retrospective on everybody's favorite undead superhero with Spawn number 45. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1996, we have a phenomenal Greg Capullo cover here. This is so good. I really feel like right around Spawn number 40 is when Greg truly came into his own and started producing the type of illustrations that he would become most well known for, most well associated with, and truly perfected the style that we all associate with him today. Now, obviously, he's tweaked this over the years here and there, but this right here, you can see this is not the same Greg Capullo that was illustrating issue number 16 of Spawn. This is a much more, I guess, honed, much more perfected art style that to me is just phenomenal and fits this character so well. I was so happy that Greg spent as much time on Spawn as he did. Story, Todd McFarlane. Pencils, Greg Capullo. Inks, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Colors, Brian Haberlin. Special thanks to Danny Meeke. Also, a special thanks to our Hangin' with Todd winner, David Bluestein. The story picks up exactly where we left off in issue number 44, where we see Spawn impaled on this tree thing. I don't know what this is. It looks like a root coming up out of the ground that has grown to, roughly a height of around 10 feet, but it could also be some sort of a tree that, I don't know, was able to turn into this weird switchback zigzag. Also, with the way this is shaped at the top, how on earth was Spawn able to slide down it so perfectly? This seems like it should have been impossible. Either way, it looks amazing. This is the point in the story where it describes the idea that in the absence of having a lance, like we saw depicted with Angela, an angel's only surefire way of eliminating a hellspawn from the earthly plane of existence is by decapitating said hellspawn. And this puts a lot of focus on how important the lance is, as it's the only weapon, apparently, that the angels have at their disposal that can just destroy a hellspawn on its own. And that in the absence of having a lance, it is really, really difficult for an angel to, quote unquote, kill a hellspawn. They're not really killing them. They're essentially just eliminating them from the earthly plane of existence and sending them back to hell so that they can then be enslaved by the Mabalja and be used in his war against heaven. But it is interesting to see that while the lance is the primary focus, and it also explains why it's so difficult for the angels to use them and get their hands on them, and why they're only given to a select few. They're very important, they're very powerful, and they don't want to risk these things getting lost by angels who are incapable of dealing with a hellspawn. But without that lance, it is still possible to defeat one, though the issue here in question does make it pretty clear that trying to face off against a hellspawn without a lance is almost certain doom and pretty much never works. We then see Tiffany jumping through the air as she raises her sword above her head, preparing to decapitate Spawn and take her trophy back to heaven and be victoriously rewarded with the rank of Flight Level 1, which is the highest rank that the angels can receive. As Tiffany comes down, she lops off Spawn's head and picks it up victoriously, believing that she will now get the adoration and prize she deserves, when suddenly the head turns into a mass of worms that engulfs her arm, and she realizes that she's been tricked. Now, the reason she believes that defeating Spawn will certainly give her this promotion is because no student level angel, which is what Tiffany is at this point, has ever defeated a Spawn in singles combat in the history of the entire universe, I guess. And she honestly thinks that this is her way of fast-tracking her way into the Flight Level 1 rank, as defeating a spawn is not necessarily a requirement. As I stated, it's never been done by anyone at her rank before. Only Flight Level 1 angels have ever defeated spawns in single combat, and it also makes it that much more impressive to see how many times Angela had done it. This is also, for anyone who's in the know, I guess, the image that was used for the Tiffany Classic Covers series action figure, even though it doesn't appear on the cover, but definitely you'll recognize this pose if you have that figure. Also, and this is interesting as well, despite her being featured now in 2 issues, she has still not been officially named Tiffany in the pages of the comic book itself. Obviously, that's her name as it appears on the side of the package for her figure, but I find it really strange that she's now appeared in 2 issues, and at no point does Todd actually say her name within these 2 issues. This is just some random unnamed angel that is attacking Spawn, trying to fast track her way to a promotion. As Tiffany spins around, she is shocked to see that Spawn has taken himself off of the tree-like object and is now going on the offensive. He managed to obscure his face long enough with the cape to use the worms that he had ingested earlier to create a false head that he could then use to fool Tiffany into believing she had won the battle. He then yells at her, stating that he's tired of Heaven coming after him and that he's in no mood for these games, and he's actually quite insulted by the fact that they've sent a child after him. Now, in some ways, this is Spawn kind of bluffing at this point, because his body is still incredibly damaged from the dissection that Curse was trying to perform on him. In fact, the only thing holding his body together at this point is, in fact, the costume. As he tackles Tiffany to the ground, she unleashes a blast of holy energy, throwing him off of her. As Spawn states, Angela was too good for you and for Heaven. But this only makes Tiffany more angry, as she states, Angela is a traitorous whore, and I'll not let you or her mock me, not ever, as we see her standing at the ready with her sword aglow with holy fire. However, Tiffany is shocked when she notices that Spawn is nowhere to be found, as she screams out into the darkness, "Show yourself, demon." And this is when Spawn launches a sneak attack from underneath the ground below Tiffany's feet, the one direction she was not expecting. He was able to do this because, as we've discussed before in previous episodes, the Spawn lore dictates that the further away you get from sunlight, the further away you get from God's grace. Meaning that underground, a place which is completely void of sunlight, is the most evil place on Earth, apparently, and is actually a place where it states here in this issue, God's grace is forbidden forever, which, okay, sure, I guess. That doesn't really make sense, but we'll run with it. We notice that Spawn's assault is fast and relentless as he wraps Tiffany up with his cape and begins striking her with his chains. He has also used this opportunity to absorb as much latent evil energy from the soil as possible, which has increased his power, but has also made him sloppy from the high that it has given him. Using this moment to her advantage, Tiffany unleashes a blast from her sword, which strikes Spawn straight in the chest. Now, assumedly, this is going to go straight through the hole that has been in his chest ever since his first interaction with Curse. Spawn's chest has never really had the opportunity to heal from that, and as far as we know, he should have had a giant hole in his chest just from having been impaled on that tree stump thing. So, while this probably isn't actually harming him that much, it is giving Tiffany the opening that she needs to potentially begin a counteroffensive. We then come to the page of news broadcast, who are all reporting on the very pathetic and disappointing funeral of the now disgraced police chief Banks, who took his own life after being railroaded by Jason Wynn. They all bring up how sad and just kind of uninspiring the funeral procession was, as his hearse was led by a single police officer on a motorcycle. And they also conveniently bring up all of the evidence that has been exposed about Chief Banks, which neatly links him back up to all of the wrongdoings of the past several months and lays everything at his feet. Of course, this is all just to take any heat that might be directed at Jason Wynn and put it on someone who is now dead and can tell no tales. Back in the apartment of Sam Burke and Twitch Williams, we see that the two of them are still on the hunt for Spawn so that they can potentially get some answers from him and figure out why Banks was the only one implicated by the evidence that they brought forward. Sam and Twitch are really no closer to this, as Spawn is nowhere to be found in New York City. Obviously, we know he's in West Virginia fighting Tiffany at this point. And Twitch does tell Sam that while he is a bit disheartened, he has hope because the homeless men that he's talked to in the alleyways told him that Spawn has disappeared like this in the past, and this makes him believe he will come back in the future. But Sam brings up a good point. He's like, when is that going to happen? How long are we going to wait? Weeks, months, a year? And Twitch realizes that Sam is correct. Sam then tells him that he can't keep hiding the truth of the two of them getting fired from his family forever, and that eventually the money's going to run out, and that he has to come clean and let them know what's going on. Sam goes on to tell Twitch that eventually his family is going to discover the truth, and they're going to wonder exactly what he's been doing during the day all this time, and why he hasn't been at home for all of these hours. Twitch explains that he's hoping that if they can get the evidence they need from Spawn, that perhaps they'll be reinstated by the police department. However, Sam tells Twitch that he has no interest in going back to the work for the department and that he's got bigger plans, as he tells Twitch to sit down in his very squishy and sticky recliner. He tells him to wait there, as we see Twitch is stuck in some old cheese and is kind of grossed out. But he tells Sam that he thinks he's right and that he probably should come clean with his wife and that she'll most likely fully understand, as she's that kind of woman. He then tells Sam, as he's obviously getting more food to eat, that he should have just listened to him from the beginning and that his wife is really a good person and that maybe that's just some kind of male ego thing that led him to try and hide this from her, and that he owes this to his family. And Sam tells him, yeah, well, at least you have a family, as he throws a coffee can into Twitch's lap and tells him that this is something he's been putting away for a long time, as Twitch is bewildered by what he sees in the can. Sam tells him that for years he's been putting a little bit of money away from every paycheck, believing that one day he would have a family of his own and a little white picket fence and the whole 9 yards. But he's now given up on that dream and believes that it's completely unattainable for him at this point in his life. He tells Twitch, who is pulling wads of cash out of the coffee can, that he's actually got a new dream now, one that's actually more realistic, that the two of them can go into business for themselves as private detectives, and that he really hopes that Twitch will work with him and that the two of them can start this business venture together. Twitch is completely overjoyed by this, as he jumps up out of the chair and gives Sam a huge hug and screams, "I love you, man. I mean, sir." And Sam just kind of rolls his eyes and states, "Yeah, I love you too, buddy," which it is kind of hilarious to see Twitch express this type of emotion, which is something he never does, just showing how overjoyed he is at the possibility of starting this new business venture with his partner and friend. And also, probably this is taking a huge weight off of his shoulders, as he really has been struggling dealing with the idea of how he was going to explain to his wife that he no longer had a job and that their family was going to be in real financial trouble in the very near future. We are then teleported back to what I have been assuming the entire time is still the wilderness of West Virginia. I don't know for a fact that Spawn is still in West Virginia. It just seems like the most likely place, given that it's the last place that he was listed as being in the pages of the book. And also the undisturbed, uninhabited wilderness would lend itself to West Virginia before any of the surrounding states around it. So we're just going to go with that. We now learn of a new ability that we have never heard of before called the Black Dispersal, which apparently has a lot of legend around it, but no actual, concrete evidence of or knowledge of that other characters would have. This is an ability that all Hellspawns have, but apparently don't use that often, as we see several creatures of the night looming in the undisturbed night around the battle that is happening between Spawn and Tiffany. As Tiffany approaches Spawn's body, she sees that he is not regenerated yet and he is still unconscious. Now, this is a result of Spawn playing possum, because apparently the Black Dispersal can only be used at very close range. So Spawn deliberately lures Tiffany into a false sense of security to get her in close. And as she gets within the range of this attack, Spawn then unleashes the Black Dispersal, which is apparently a concentration of pure malicious energy that erupts from his chest and showers her with the aura of the damned. It doesn't actually do that much damage itself, realistically, as we see that Spawn's power level here is listed at 6,786. What it does is completely douse its target in this hell energy, hell aura, whatever you want to call it, and turn them into a beacon for all of the evil creatures in the area. And as it's been stated in previous issues, any nocturnal creature is apparently evil, even creatures like wolves who do not live exclusively at night. They are also active during the day, so they're not even like true nocturnal creatures, but sure, we're going to run with it. Tiffany takes a step back, but is actually quite happy when she realizes that Spawn's attack seems to have done nothing to her. She mocks Spawn, stating that he's too weak to fight against her, and is then surprised when he just stands there doing nothing and asks, "What are you doing? Surely you haven't surrendered," as she grins, believing that she's won the day. However, at this moment, she is suddenly attacked by a swarm of bats from above, and then grabbed by a pack of wolves who knock her to the ground. She looks up to see that she is face to face with a snake, which is not a nocturnal creature, seeing as how they actually have to bask in the sun on a daily basis so that they don't die. She then looks up to see that there is a snarling bear standing above her, a grizzly no less, which is impressive given that there's no such thing as grizzly bears on the eastern seaboard of the US. They don't live east of the Mississippi, in fact, but sure, there's one here in West Virginia for no reason. As she tries to run away from all of the animals attacking her, she is grabbed around her knees by Spawn's chains as he yanks her to the ground, and all of the quote-unquote evil creatures of the night swarm her in a vicious attack. The attack is over quickly, but it is very ferocious, as we see that Tiffany's body has been rendered of all of its flesh, and she is now really nothing more than a pile of bones. Spawn stands above her victorious and simply states, "This is insane," as his cape whips in the wind. Meanwhile, back in New York City, we see that Wanda has gone to the doctor's office as she's been feeling under the weather for a while now. The doctor completes his examination and tells her that she seems okay, though she does have a mild case of strep, and he's going to write her a prescription for it. He then asks her about Terry, who also has not been to his office in some time, and he's concerned about Terry's health and wants him to get in. Wanda agrees that this is the best thing for him and states that while Terry has been busy, he's also been getting rather sick himself, and she believes she may have given him what she has. Also, why on earth is Wanda undressed in this doctor's office? This is a simple exam of just, let me listen to your heart, check in your ear, let me look down your throat. At no point would this have been a reason for her to disrobe and just be sitting here in her underwear. I have never once gone to a doctor's office saying, "Hey, I've got a sore throat, I'm feeling kind of sick," and then being like, "All right, well, take off all your clothes, I need you half naked in front of me." This is crazy. This was literally just Greg wanting to draw Wanda in her underwear. We are then teleported to the CIA headquarters in New York, where we see that Terry Fitzgerald is in fact burning the midnight oil, working diligently to try and uncover the evidence he needs to finally expose Jason Wynn's evil dealings and bring him to justice. However, as Wanda stated, he is dealing with a sickness as we see him insert an actual Hall's cough drop in his mouth. Again, just another example of Todd playing fast and loose with real-life trademarks. Unfortunately for Terry, this sickness is going to require some actual real medicine, as he seems to be in a very much downward spiral of health, as it even states at the bottom of the page that he will soon regret not listening to his body. Meanwhile, in Rat City, on another part of New York streets, where we see Spawn finally returning home, he is greeted by an empty throne. It's covered with even more trash than normal as Spawn tries to figure out exactly how long he's been gone, as he's fully lost track of time. However, before he can gather himself, he is interrupted by none other than Cagliostro, who has been waiting for him to reappear. Cog tells him, "You can't run from it, Al. It's here whether you like it or not, and there's no way that you can get away with it. Or get away from it, I should say." And Spawn seems rather confused by Cog's words. Spawn then tells Cog that the only thing left that seems to make sense to him are the walls of the alleys, and that everything is completely out of control, including his costume. Cog tells Spawn that he has to wrestle his costume back under his control. Spawn asks, very jokingly, "What do you think I've been doing?" And Cog tells him, "What I think you've been doing is losing your grip. Your costume is morphing too quickly, and you have to wrestle it back under your control and utilize its power to become the warrior you need to be." Spawn then asks why the costume is doing this, and Cog explains that it probably had to do with it experiencing some kind of trauma, and he then asks Spawn what's happened to him. Spawn tells him of being separated from the costume by curse, and Cog knows that there's more to the story, so he asks, "What of your battles?" At this point, Spawn tells him about having a battle with an angel, aka Tiffany, and that he himself, the costume, as he puts it, killed the angel. Not that he was upset about it because she had it coming to her, and that heaven seems to be really pissy about him. Cog explains that this is because they've had very poor interactions with Hellspawns over the centuries, and that this is to be expected. Spawn then shows Cog that his body is nearly healed, and is hopeful that since he's back in one piece, that the costume will relinquish its control and basically respect Spawn's authority once again. However, Cog tells him it's not that simple. The costume itself is now become too powerful to just give its control back to Spawn, and that it yearns for evil, and that it feeds off of evil. It's what it uses to sustain its life force. And that if Spawn doesn't figure out a way to wrangle the costume back under his control and become its master, things are going to get really bad. And Spawn asks, "Well, what happens if that doesn't take place, if I can't gain control once again?" And Cog simply states, "Then God help us all," as we see him walk away, leaving Spawn to sit alone and ponder what his next move should be. After a few hours, Spawn finally manages to fall asleep. However, when Al Simmons loses consciousness, the costume decides to take over, as it stands him up and walks over towards a nearby dumpster. We see then that the costume had actually been harboring a large grouping of worms in the folds of the cloak, and it then deposits them into the dumpster and closes the lid. The costume then walks Al's body back over to a nearby pile of trash and settles down surrounded by a bunch of rats and bats, as it is not only harvesting the evil from these night creatures, it was setting aside another group of evil night creatures to feed on later, as we realize that the costume is starting to become very sentient and is perhaps a much bigger danger than Al realizes as we reach the end of the story. We then get to Image info, nothing really that interesting to talk about here. This is about upcoming Image comics and also about the upcoming Spawn animated series, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about any of this. We then reach the spawning ground, the letter section where fans could write in and potentially have their letters published and responded to by Todd McFarlane. There's some interesting things going on in this particular spawning ground, notably in the little blurb here at the beginning. Todd explains why Steve Oliff has been absent from the credits of the comic books, and that has to do with Steve at this point in time being very heavily involved in the production of the Spawn animated series. Therefore, he was unable to be working on the comic book at this time. And there are several interesting letters that take place in this issue. One of which is Todd responding to fans who have been overwhelmingly providing outcry that they wanted to get Sam and Twitch action figures. And those were ones that Todd was a little bit reluctant to put into production, given the fact that they're not superhero characters, and he was afraid that they wouldn't necessarily sell very well. But given the overwhelming demand that he's been receiving in all of his letters, trying to get him to produce these figures, he's finally decided to release the two of them in a combined 2-pack. We then get another letter where he talks about some of the more random characters that have not appeared in the pages of the comic books. And he explains that any character that he produces as an action figure who has not already appeared within the pages of Spawn is a character that he may potentially use in the future for a story with Spawn, and that any one of those characters is basically on the table, which is pretty cool that he's using this as kind of like a testing ground for like, what is the response I'm getting for this character in an action figure form? Is it worth it for me to then try and integrate them into the actual ongoing story? I like that idea. And obviously it's something that's only really a possibility due to the fact that Todd owns his own toy company, whereas most creators don't. So it's a very unique thing that Todd has this ability to test out characters in such a palpable way of like, hey, are people paying for this character? If so, I'll then put them potentially into the story where they'll then pay for the book. And we then get one very interesting letter where a reader explains that they worked at a Toys R Us and that the reason that people couldn't find McFarlane toys on the shelves is because he and all of the other employees who worked there were buying them and never putting them on the shelves to begin with, and then reselling them to local comic book stores at a markup, which is why they were then like $40 and $50 at these comic book stores. And that he believed that this was probably happening all over the country, making it impossible for fans to get their hands on the figures that they want. Now, this is something that Walmart specifically put rules in place against. Excuse me. If you are old enough to remember the Tickle Me Elmo plush toy, that was like the hot toy of Christmas 96 or 97. I can't remember. It was one of those 2 years. But it was a big news story where a couple of Walmart employees got fired at a store somewhere in the US for trying to hide a couple of them in the back room so that they could then purchase them and get them to their kids. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, you fired these people over it. But this is the reason why they put such a harsh penalty in place, was that this was becoming a real problem where employees were either getting their hands on merchandise before customers ever had a chance to buy it so that they could keep it, or even worse, resell it at a profit, which was essentially, kind of using Walmart as their distributor. And yes, customers have the ability to do that as well, but it is something that Walmart did not want to become a commonplace thing for their actual employees, because that was essentially taking the ability to purchase away from the customers that were frequenting the store every day. So while it does seem harsh, it's understandable why they would go to such lengths, as they wanted to make sure that the merchandise was actually getting to the people that they were trying to sell it to in the first place. We then see this 2-page pinup of Spawn and Blindside. Now, those of you who don't remember Blindside, there's a good reason for it. Blindside is a character that basically went nowhere. I think I have like one, possibly, maybe 2 issues of Blindside. This character was not successful, and I'll make videos about these issues at some point or another in the future, but it's not high on my list of priorities. I got a lot of other videos that I'll be making way before I ever get down into the weeds of Blindside, so keep an eye out for it, but don't hold your breath, folks. It's going to be some time before I get there. We then reach the end cap, which is normally reserved for showing off what's going to be coming up new with McFarlane Toys. However, this issue focuses on a recap of Toy Fair 96 and the showing that McFarlane Toys had that year. It's really kind of interesting, honestly, seeing how much bigger a deal Toy Fair was back in the 90s than it is today. Obviously, 1996 was a world where brick and mortar was still the powerhouse behind retail, and online sales had not yet become the dominant force that they are today. So it's a very historical look at the way things were versus the way they are now in 2026 as I'm recording this video. And it's really cool to listen to them tell the stories of how they set up their booths and how they were really working to try and get brick and mortar retailers to commit to large volume sales or purchases of their toys. It's a very different interaction between manufacturers and retailers in 1996 versus 2026. And it's really kind of cool to have this little encapsulation of it in print in front of us. We then, of course, get the Spawn Direct 2-page order form. I'm not going to go into anything about this because I've talked about it dozens of times at this point. If you want to know my thoughts, check out some of my older videos where I talk about it more in depth. And on the final page of this issue, we get an advertisement for Sisters of Mercy from Maximum Press. Does anybody remember this comic book? Because I sure as hell don't. I can say with a fairly high degree of certainty that during my long-term quest of digging through endless dollar boxes at nearly every comic book store I enter, I have not once encountered an issue of Sisters of Mercy, which leads me to believe that very few issues of this comic book were ever sold. I could be wrong, but it seems likely. And honestly, I can see why. The artwork looks very amateurish in my opinion. Granted, I understand that's a very opinionated statement. Some people may disagree, but it really does seem as though this was someone brand new to the comic book landscape illustrating these issues, and that they were not very well developed in their skills. And I'd assume the writing was probably along those same lines as well. Could be wrong. If you have somehow come across this comic book and read it, please feel free to tell me about it in the comments below, because I would love to find someone who knew what Sisters of Mercy was. We then, on the reverse inside cover, get an advertisement for Spawn the website, aka Spawn.com, which, if you're wondering, does still exist to this day. And while it seems a little silly that they would make such a big deal about a website, in 1996, surfing the web was a pretty new concept to most people, and it does make sense to advertise the website in this print form media, given that people in America would have been logging on to for the first time in most cases. So that's why you still see the http://www.spawn.com, because you had to really spell it out for a lot of people of like, this is how you look up a website. This is how you find where you're going to. It wasn't a landscape that was completely dominated by just type a random word into Google and get what you want. This was how we had to search for things back then. And, you know, we really needed our hands held in a lot of cases to be able to get to where we were going. But kudos to Todd for taking the time to really try to push this website, which still exists to this day, where you can still buy Spawn and other Spawn related products on it. Like it's still around, so he was doing something right. And that was Spawn number 45. Overall, I thought that the issue was pretty decent. The artwork was spectacular, and the story was intriguing. The only complaint I have is something that I vocalized in other episodes, and it's that I feel like too often Todd just invents a new ability or power for Spawn and then just gives it to him. And Spawn just knows how to use it without it ever having been mentioned before, without him experimenting with his powers to see what he can do. He just suddenly can do a thing that we didn't know existed and use it to perfection to get himself out of a jam. And oftentimes this feels like lazy writing. Like Todd has written himself into a corner and then just invents a new ability to get Spawn out of whatever jam he's in. And sometimes he tries to explain it like he did in this issue, where it's the costume working of its own volition and Spawn not really having control over his powers. And to certain degrees, that makes sense, but you can only go back to that well so many times before it starts to feel a little bit tired. And I really think that it would have been a better idea to show Spawn experimenting with his powers, trying to figure out exactly what he can do, or have Cagliostro teach him things that he didn't know he could do, as we saw him do when he first appeared and showed Spawn that he could transmute things into existence. I just feel like that would serve better in the long-term storytelling aspect than the way that Todd's been doing it up until this point. Now then again, these are all just my opinions. Your opinion may be that Todd was doing it just right, and it seems completely logical that this would happen to Spawn, and that none of it feels lazy in any way. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.